Welcome to my review of Laura Marshall's Friend Request. According to the cover, this is the most addictive thriller you'll read this year. Fresh from a 3-month novel writing course, Friend Request is Marshall's debut novel and was published in 2017. According to the sleeve notes, it won the BAFTA Novel Award and the Lucy Cavendish Fiction Prize in 2016. The plot is standard thriller stuff, despite the insistence from Marion Keyes that it has an excellent twist, and coming with no less than 4 pages of accolades from various sources. Looking at these sources, they seem either exclusively female or from female-orientated magazines such as Closer, Good Housekeeping, and Cosmopolitan. This does give an indication of the intended audience. It becomes obvious fairly soon that this is a novel aimed squarely at the sort of audience that lapped up 50 Shades of Grey. See my review. Not that Friend Request is sexually explicit, but because the standard of writing is up there, perhaps down there, with E.L. James. Louise, our heroine, gets a friend request from an old school acquaintance called Maria Weston, the problem being that Maria disappeared on the night of the school leavers party and has been presumed dead since then. Louise is estranged from Sam, and the two have history, being school acquaintances themselves. They also have a son together, Henry, who Louise dotes on a touch obsessively. Louise will get a few messages all along the lines of "I know what you did 27 summers ago," and this book reads a lot like the 27th sequel to "I Know What You Did Last Summer." Facebook thrillers are 10 a penny these days, and this does nothing that hasn't been done before in any number of them. Louise is hiding a guilty secret about her involvement in Maria's disappearance that, when revealed, is hugely underwhelming. And the story switches from a disappointing mystery thriller to an even more disappointing whodunit when one of the guests is killed at a school reunion. The first line sets the tone. The email arrives in my inbox like an unexploded bomb. These melodramatic similes are Marshall's stockball, and the story is utterly littered with them. They nearly all take the form of X makes me feel Y like a Z. As we go through this review, I'm going to put some of the best, I mean worst, but you probably guessed that, examples on the screen. On the first page, there is the first example also that Marshall actually knows what she's doing. I quite like this quote. "It feels as though a sponge has been lodged in my throat, soaking up water, swelling and clogging, leaving me struggling for breath." The use of the water imagery combined with the effective use of sibilant alliteration is quite powerful. This example from page 236, a scene where Louise enters Henry's bedroom, convinced that somebody has taken him, while not doing anything poetic with form, is effective in function. Marshall uses short punchy sentences and has already established Henry as a likeable character. The two things combine to create tension. I am paralyzed by the fear that what lies behind it is all my worst nightmares come true. I have a strange sense that this is the last moment of my life as I know it, that I will look back and know that after this, things were never the same. I put my hand on the handle and push. My eyes are drawn straight to the bed. Unfortunately, between pages 1 and 236 are 235 pages of mediocrity and drivel. There's also about 100 pages after, but who's counting? As shown by the above example, Marshall can create a little bit of tension, but for the most part, she does so in incredibly repetitive, simplistic ways. She uses a standard technique used to prolong a mystery that isn't much of a mystery or worth prolonging. Instead of saying what's going on, she uses language to hide it, but Marshall only has one phrase, "What we did to Maria," and uses it with such regularity it almost becomes amusing. Here are some examples. This is also a bit of a problem in that the book is almost exclusively told from Louise's internal first-person perspective, so who is she hiding it from? In some regard you could argue perhaps from herself, but that would seem unconvincing as she clearly knows what's happened and thinks about it constantly. She just skirts around the issue in this way. When the truth is revealed, Marshall actually continues the linguistic game to the extent that you begin to wonder if you've had full disclosure. Perhaps there's more to come, but there isn't, and it's all very underwhelming. Louise's guilt feels OTT. What she's done probably wouldn't trouble the police at all, yet she's desperate to not involve them, to the point again where it starts to feel silly. The truth here is that to write the police in a way that is convincing, you have to research police procedures. Marshall clearly hasn't, so she's desperate to not involve them in her story, yet she knows her readers will be wondering why Louise doesn't. For example, Louise colludes with Peter to keep the fact they spent the night together from the police, worried that it will show them in a negative light. However, being together provides them both with the basis, at least, of an alibi for the murder at the school reunion. It would simply be better to tell the police than not. Ultimately, obstructing justice will carry a heavier prison sentence than anything they've done to that point. Louise, as the focal point and driving force of the book, cannot be portrayed as so utterly stupid for the book to work properly. While Marshall might claim that the increasingly stupid or odd things Louise does form part of a portrayal of the long-term damage keeping a secret like hers has done to her personality. However, because we never see Louise acting in any other way, we never get a normal to use as a benchmark against the later Unhinged. Instead, she is a mixture of baffling and stupid decisions. She is designed to appeal to people such as herself, 40-something single mums. She frets about her weight, including describing her lunch as shameful, fat-filled lasagna. The full passage is on screen, the second part of which is irrelevant, and if anything is shameful, it's this horribly overwritten passage. I unloaded the shameful, fat-filled lasagna from my tray and sat down, pressing the sharp end of my apple juice straw into the little silver disc until it popped, a bead of amber liquid oozing from the hole. Louise is also the plain one. Boys like him don't go out with girls like me. But she's also insufferably shallow as a youngster and describes herself as justified in not liking somebody because of their clothes. Admittedly, this is her younger self in 1989, but Friend Request tells the 1989 and 2016 stories concurrently, so the reader experiences them in that way. The 27-year gap between events is trivialized by the literary format. Louise may insist that she's changed, but she's still the sort of idiot who drinks to help herself think more clearly. She's also, like Anastasia Steele, prone to ridiculous overreactions to the love interest. Here are a couple of examples. I lean against the cubicle door, feeling my heart beating all over my body. I put my hands on either side of me, pressing against the wall, as if that will stop me falling. I can feel the heat of his hand on my arm, his eyes on my tongue. And I hand Sam his coat, and as I do, my hand brushes his, and I feel a jolt of electricity that tingles throughout my body. The first example is from a contrived scene in which Louise spills wine just so that her ex Sam can be aroused by her licking it from her hand. Who licks the wine by sticking their tongue out? You might put your mouth to the spill, but you wouldn't lick it like you're filming a porno. Here's the full quote. I swap my glass to the other hand and raise my wrist to my mouth to lick the wine, stopping it running any further down my arm to my dress. Then I see Sam's eyes on my tongue and I stop. It's kind of gross on page 197, and it's kind of gross still when revisited on 227. It's the sort of garbage you expect in mummy porn like 50 Shades. As the book progresses from mystery to whodunit, Louise becomes an increasingly frustrating character. Marshall is making it up as she goes along, and it becomes increasingly contrived as she jumps through hoops to explain away the generally odd behaviour of her character. It's a sure sign of a writer working without the aid of a coherent plot or any kind of research. After the death of somebody involved in the mystery, Louise is still more concerned with keeping the secret about Maria. The problem is that the secret has been disclosed to the reader, and in the light of people being murdered, does not seem as big a deal as the very real threat that she will be next. Her lying to the police about it seems likely to cost her her life. On page 233, for example, Louise gets an explicit death threat. On 234, she is still lying to the police. On 236, when she thinks something bad might have happened to Henry, she searches the entire house until the last place I haven't looked is Henry's bedroom. The last place? Why was this not the first place she looked? Later, after causing a scene at the park after Henry is nearly abducted by a mystery woman, and after receiving Facebook threats to that end or worse, she doesn't tell Sam about the threats even though he looks after their child because he'll be furious at me. To give Marshall due credit, Sam has been established as a little bit threatening, so it's understandable that she might be frightened of him, but I think that the concern for Henry's safety would outweigh this. She repeatedly describes the child as everything that she cares about in the world. As things get more and more desperate, she ignores a series of phone calls from both the police and from Esther. The former is almost understandable given the idiotic way she's been lying to them, but the latter is the one person who knows the full story and is trying to help her. Louise is then concerned that the police will see the Facebook messages from Maria to Sophie, but consoles herself that the messages will be dismissed as just messages from another friend. As far as they're concerned, Maria is just another of Sophie's many Facebook friends. I'll go out on a limb and guess she's the only dead friend still sending her messages, but aside from that, Louise has no reason to believe that Sophie has told her everything about all of the messages she's received. Sophie has kept other things from her, and Louise herself has not told anybody the full story of the messages she's received. After fighting off the murderer in her own home, and with Henry still with her, Louise phones her friend Polly and waits 20 minutes for her to come. She doesn't phone the police, she doesn't leave the house, she has zero idea where the murderer might be at that point. It is impossible not to feel frustrated at her behaviour. To describe it as erratic would be to give credence to the theory that she is increasingly unhinged. But where Welsh, when writing Filth, used a number of techniques to describe his protagonist's increasingly fraught state of mind, Louise's portrayal doesn't really shift from the first page to the last, which instead gives credence to the theory that Marshall is contriving her story because her character's behaviour doesn't truly make sense. Ultimately, it's hard not to draw the conclusion that a 3-month course in creative writing is not going to make up for deficiencies in your work if you can't write situational character or do even the most perfunctory attempt at research. This book is full of examples of either bad writing or bad editing. Here are a couple. The total absence of any punctuation here turns what should be 2 or 3 basic sentences into a single jumbled mess. I can see one of the tower blocks that loom here and there like malevolent giants over the rows of Victorian terraces all turn into flats like mine that make up this part of London. My handbag is flying up and down, and the carrier bag in my hand containing a bottle of wine that I spent 40 minutes choosing in the supermarket last night bangs against my leg with every stride. Prior to this unwieldy sentence, Marshall was trying to raise the tension in a scene, hugely unoriginal, where Louise is followed into an underpass. Marshall was using short sentences in the build-up to try and create tension, but she also fluffs the job there by using the word I far too often. I am about halfway along when I hear footsteps. I can see a man about 50 yards ahead of me, but otherwise I am alone. I speed up just for a fraction. I hope not enough for anyone to notice, but I'm sure the footsteps speed up too. As this scene demonstrates, not only is this poorly written, but it's little more than an amalgamation of scenes we've seen in other, better and worse thrillers. Friend Request fails to be better than the sum of its borrowed parts because Marshall fails to coherently blend them together, leaving the whole thing feeling laboured and contrived. The long-winded explanation of how Peter and Louise arrange their methods of getting to the reunion just so that Marshall can then contrive them getting into bed together is what sets up their equally unconvincing reasons for keeping this from the police, even when Pete could really use an alibi. The school reunion is held in a hall, and Louise is told that the booking was made by a Naomi Straw. Marshall has her characters labour on the straw with an E to such an extent that only the blind or stupid will fail to spot that it's an anagram of Maria Weston. This scene also includes characters discussing how the event was booked and arranged. These passages make it clear Marshall is writing without even doing desultory research of the most basic aspects of her story. With confidence in her writing, she would not feel the need to explain unnecessary things nobody is bothered about anyway. It's like in Jaws when the oxygen tank explodes. During filming, someone suggested to Spielberg that nobody would believe that, and he said, they will if they've watched the movie to that point. Basically, you can get away with a lot of license if your story is convincing, but because of the ham-fisted storytelling, this fails to convince. Marshall does the exact same thing with everyone finding Sophie bringing Pete, who she only dated a handful of times previously, to the school reunion. Even the police have time to find that odd apparently, but it's just not such a big deal. It requires the investigation Marshall, but not the police, gives it. As more and more people tell Louise she should go to the police and the threats ratchet up to include her own murder and the abduction and threat of harm to her child, it becomes less and less convincing, and it was already unconvincing, that she wouldn't involve them. Marshall loses control of her story at the school reunion. Once the mystery of what happened to Maria is out, the book has nothing to sustain it. The big mystery is a damp squib. The whodunit aspect of the story is a failure on every level of characterization, language, and narrative. The last example of the failure of this book that I can give without spoilers comes when Louise recounts the news from the police that the killer's car has been found. She relates the details that the driver had crashed into a tree and simply left the car where it was. Its left bumper crumpled into a pine tree, shards of glass from the headlights sprinkled around. Unless the policeman is a hack author fresh from a 3-month course in creative writing, why on earth would he relate this information? If he didn't relate it, how would Louise know it? Not only is it very poorly written, it's pointless and it's stupid. In conclusion, this is a dismal book. Failing utterly to create a convincing or consistent lead character, Marshall instead has to create her a perfect child to create any sense of decency in her. Her writing relies on childish word replacement to try and keep the mystery going. Its great reveal is hugely disappointed and sets up the even worse second half of the book where Marshall displays her inability again, this time delivering a mess of a murder mystery full of unconvincing character choices and the sort of police procedural that will insult an audience informed not just by the many CSI iterations, but any of their many imitators. In modern times, you just cannot get away with the lazy winging it approach on display here. If you're looking for some pulp trash to read on the beach while you're dozing on your summer holes, then, and only then, could I possibly recommend this to you. Otherwise, its only use is if World Cup fever has gripped wherever you are and you've nothing left to kick around.